Stalin created an island of cannibals before World War II, and here's why.
This video contains mature themes. Watch with discretion.
Over the course of a few weeks, thousands of prisoners froze, burned to death, and starved. This horror show, marked by extreme suffering, neglect, and cruelty, started in 1929 with Stalin's infamous policy of collectivization. Stalin and the Soviet leadership had several goals in mind when implementing collectivization. They believed that it would lead to efficient agricultural production, as they needed to generate a surplus of food and raw materials for export to finance industrialization.
The people will produce millions of tons of wheat, which the state will sell to purchase the machinery to build tractors, tanks, and planes. And in this way, the Soviet Union will catch up on its 100-year lag in only 5 years.
Collectivization also allowed the Soviet government to exercise greater control over the rural population and suppress any potential resistance from individual landowners. The process was met with significant resistance from many peasants who were attached to their land. In response, the Soviet government employed harsh measures, including confiscations, deportations, and repression. Kulaks, relatively wealthier peasants, were depicted as greedy parasites and were often targeted as enemies of the state. Stalin was instrumental in this.
He launched a propaganda campaign to smear farmers. He labeled anyone resistant to collectivization a kulak, a Russian term for a wealthy peasant.
To locate the kulaks in hiding, a new identification system in the form of IDs were issued by the Soviet government. This document was called an internal passport. Those caught without one would be deported. The consequences of collectivization were disastrous, devastating the regions of Ukraine and Kazakhstan. It led to food shortages and famines. The most notorious example is the Holodomor, a man-made famine in Ukraine during 1932 to 1933, which resulted in millions of deaths. Those who opposed collectivization were arrested and sent to gulag work camps without a trial. Women were the most vulnerable, as they were subject to rape and sexual assault by other prisoners and prison guards. In May 1933, during the height of the Soviet collectivization campaign and the resulting famine, around 6,000 people, mostly political prisoners and labor camp inmates, were forcibly resettled. Arrest quotas were sky high. People were taken from farms and cities. Police deported just about anyone they could get their hands on. Even children were arrested on the loosest of crimes.
The NKVD had a quota, and to meet that arrest quota, anyone was fair game, from children to the elderly.
They were sent to the remote and uninhabited island of Nazino in Siberia. Prisoners were loaded onto barges and sent down the Ob River, surviving on about 7 ounces of bread a day. Approximately 5,000 prisoners made up the first group, and around 30 would die on this 4-day journey. Conditions on the island were horrific. It was a marshy, frozen swamp about 3 kilometers long and 600 meters wide. The Soviet authorities had not adequately prepared for the influx of deportees. There was no shelter, no tools or supplies, and no real food. Most still wore the clothes they were arrested in. When guards couldn't be bothered to bake the flour into bread, they simply rationed 200 grams of flour to each prisoner. This is less food that even prisoners in Auschwitz got. The inmates were left to fend for themselves with very limited resources. Many of the deportees were already weakened by malnutrition and exhaustion before even reaching the island. On the first day, about 300 people died. Riots eventually broke out as the prisoners united against the abuse. In order to combat this, guards forced them to self-organize into groups of 150 people. They then gave flour to some of the groups rather than just individuals. This unequal distribution proved to be very effective in dividing the uprising. Gangs started to form, and as the situation deteriorated, desperate measures were taken. Reports emerged of people cannibalizing those who had died. The guards did not intervene. The harsh living conditions combined with the lack of food and medical care led to a high death toll. It's estimated that around 2,000 people died on Nazino Island during this period. Overnight, many would die from exposure. Some would even burn to death by laying too close to the campfires while trying to endure the cold. On the 4th day, the guards passed out sacks of flour to make bread. When the prisoners refused, panic set in, and they rushed to mix the flour with the infested water available. Many succumbed to dysentery, which is an infection of the intestines. Witness accounts stated many people just ate the flour as it was, and since it was powder, many suffocated from breathing it in. The guards who remained in relative comfort on the barges would shoot at the prisoners for sport.
From the safety of their barges, they got drunk, went on deck, and shot prisoners for fun.
Sometimes they would throw out scraps of food and watch it be fought over as entertainment. On separate occasions, guards would exchange some of their own rations for sexual favors from the girls and women. There was always more madness. Prisoners with gold teeth would be attacked and the teeth pulled, which were then used to barter with the guards for more food. Chances of escape were narrow. Many drowned in the River Ob trying to get to the mainland. There were only a few exceptions, including Kuzma Salnikov, who managed to brave the river and live out his days on a farm. Otherwise, those who made it to the bank were shot on sight or hunted for sport. By the 10th day, cannibalism was commonplace.
As a cold June dawned in remotest Siberia, the starving survivors did the only thing they could. With all of the bodies lying around, they started eating them.
One prisoner said, "I only ate livers and hearts. It was very simple, just like shashlik. We made skewers from willow branches, cut the flesh into pieces, stuck it on the skewers, and roasted it over the campfire. I picked those who were not quite living, but not yet quite dead." One witness on the mainland reported seeing a woman with butchered calves. "I saw that her calves had been cut off. I asked, and she said that they did it to me on the island of death, cut them off, and cooked them." The most chilling story involves a woman who was tied to a tree while men cut off her breasts and muscles to eat while she was still alive. 1 month after the first prisoners arrived, the camp was closed. Of the 6,700 prisoners that arrived, approximately 2,000 were dead and 2,000 were missing. Only 2,856 managed to survive, but the vast majority were ill and traumatized. Cannibal Island would likely have been disregarded as an exaggeration or as a falsehood entirely if it wasn't for a local communist named Vasily Velishko. He investigated rumors of cannibalism on Nazino Island. Without speaking to his superiors, he made it to the island in August of that year and stumbled upon half-eaten bodies hidden in the tall grass. He interviewed dozens of villagers and recorded their testimonies, which he compiled into an 11-page report that he submitted to Moscow. As expected, the report was buried in the state archives and Velishko was fired and kicked out of the Communist Party. The report remained lost until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The nuclear threat, while far from gone, is receding. Eastern Europe is free. The Soviet Union itself is no more.
The report wasn't uncovered until 1994. To honor the people that were unjustly deported and died on Nazino Island, a monument in the form of a large cross was planted on the island. In 2018, a church was also built to commemorate them. Joseph Stalin's misguided government policy proved to be a failure in every way. The events on Cannibal Island were a tragic episode that highlighted the brutality and indifference of the Soviet regime under Stalin's leadership. Despite its relatively short duration, the suffering endured was unparalleled. Thanks for watching this episode of History 101. Be sure to subscribe to see more videos like this.